Okay, well, let's get this show on the road. I'm sure people will still be joining us as we go along. I'm Tom Ardito. I work for a nonprofit organization called Restore America's Estuaries. We work very closely with EPA Region 1 to manage the SNEP Watershed Implementation Grants Program, which we've been doing for about 4 years. And I can, just from looking at the list of folks on the webinar, I can see a number of new faces or names anyway, as well as a number of people who are already very familiar with the program, either current or former grantees or other folks we've worked with in the past. So I'll aim this toward people who are really not very familiar with this program. And for those of you who know the program well, there'll be a few minor changes. I'll tell you right up front that I'm not dropping any bombshells about, significant changes to the way this program is going to be managed this year. It'll be pretty similar to the way we did it last year with a few minor changes, but so far so good in terms of the way this program has been working. So we try to improve it every year, but we also try not to fix what isn't broken. So with that, I'll get started on talking about 2022 SNEP Watershed Implementation Grants. Give me just a minute here. I am going to share my screen because I have a little PowerPoint for this presentation. Okay. Again, we're talking about 2022 SNEP Watershed Implementation Grants and the upcoming grant round. I assume that if you're on this webinar, you know that the RFP is out. You can get it at snepgrants.org. And from that page, you can link with all the information you need to apply to this grant this year. First, I'll tell you a little bit more about Restore America's Estuaries, which is the organization I work for. Again, we're a nonprofit organization. We are a network of coastal conservation organizations around the country, including Save the Bay here in Rhode Island. And we work very closely with EPA Region 1 to manage this program. The SNEP program is I think of it as kind of the umbrella program that this grants program is under. So our grant program, the Watershed Implementation Grants, are one component of the larger SNEP or Southeast New England program that's run out of EPA Region 1. It was originally created by Congress in 2014. And you can see here the vision and the goals that EPA has established for the program. So it really, I'm not going to read these word for word, but you could sort of say there are 3 pillars to what we do, which is clean water, healthy watersheds and habitats, and sustainable communities. And so we try to approach these 3 goals in an integrated way through this grants program. Oh, and I should have said up front that I'll talk a little bit about the grant program, and then we can have a conversation. I'll stick around to answer any questions that you have at the end of the program. So feel free to type questions into the box at any time. I'll try to check them periodically, and I see one here from Keith Barber, for example. I'll address that at the end of the at the end of the presentation, once once we've kind of gone through the main points. If there's something that needs to be clarified, I'll try to get to that sooner. Go ahead and raise your hand if you like. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this is the SNEP region, we call it, or the funding region of this program. And again, this was established by EPA as a result of this congressional directive. And you can see it's a watershed-based program, and it encompasses most of Southeast New England. Most of Rhode Island, with the exception of a very little bit that drains into the Quinnebog Basin to the west there, is included. All of the Narragansett Bay watershed is included, and that's why our funding region extends as far north as Worcester and Brockton, Mass. And within that is included, both the Blackstone watershed, which is sort of that western arm of the upper Narragansett Bay watershed, and the Taunton River watershed, which is the eastern arm, if you will, of the Narragansett Bay watershed. And then as we continue over to the east, you can see the Buzzards Bay watershed is included, as well as all the coastal watersheds in the Westport River area and so forth, as well as the south shore, essentially, of Cape Cod. In other words, all of Cape Cod that drains south into Nantucket Sound is within our funding region, as well as all the islands of Rhode Island and Massachusetts. So as you can see, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, the Elizabeth Islands, all the islands in Narragansett Bay, and Block Island. The watershed boundary can create some questions sometimes because, as you know, municipal boundaries, the state boundaries don't conform typically with watershed boundaries. If you have a project that is occurring both inside and outside of the boundary, like right on the boundary line, give me a call and we can talk it through. In general, we look for projects that have a significant impact in the SNEP region. If they stray over the line a little bit, we can probably make that work. But if it's entirely over the line, for example, you can see Plymouth, Mass, is a good example of a town where the watershed boundary kind of goes right up through the middle of Plymouth. And if you were doing a project, say a salt marsh project in Plymouth, it would pretty clearly be ineligible for our funding. Whereas if you were doing a project in the southwestern corner of Plymouth, that drained to the Taunton Basin, it would clearly be eligible. And anything else we could, talk about. And I should say too that if you can link from our webpage, snepgrants.org, or from EPA's SNEP, main SNEP page, to an interactive map. So if you have a question about a particular project and whether it falls inside or outside of the boundary, just jump there, and it's very easy to find out for sure. So our priorities are, let me first say the purpose of the grants program is to implement the priorities of the broader SNEP strategic plan. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a minute. But I definitely encourage you to go look at the strategic plan and read it if you're interested in applying for this grants program, because our evaluation of grant proposals and our funding decisions are almost entirely made through the lens of the SNEP strategic plan. And it's a really good plan, and it's really comprehensive. So it allows us to fund a really broad array of projects, all kinds of projects throughout the region, because it takes a holistic approach to the ecosystem and ecosystem problems and solutions in the region. But these are the priorities that EPA laid out in the strategic plan: increasing local capacity, increasing solutions, ensuring diverse representation, demonstrating ways to address common challenges, and increasing leaders' understanding of the benefit of restoration projects. And the word restoration here, I think is used in really the broadest possible sense. And all of these priorities, regardless of the specific project that you're doing, whether it's a stormwater project or a dam removal project or a wetland restoration project, we would like to see one or more of these principles. And many of the projects we fund, I would say, address all or most of these priorities in the course of doing whatever their primary goal is. Restore America's Estuaries has been partnering with EPA since 2017. So we've been making awards under this program since 2018. We've done 4 grant rounds so far. Again, some of you on the call have already been recipients of our grants, and others, I think, are new to the program. And you can see here the statistics on the amount of funding and the number of grants we've awarded to date, just through the RAE EPA partnership. EPA, prior to RAE's involvement, EPA made quite a few grants under SNEP and through a variety of different existing EPA programs. But since 2014, the implementation grants component, the sort of competitive open grants piece of SNEP support, has been through the RAE partnership. This number of 100 grantees is actually quite low, because as it says here, we've awarded about 50 grants, but actually exactly 50 grants so far. But most of those are partnership projects and can have anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6 organizations that are either receiving funding or contributing match. So, in practice, it's probably closer to 200 organizations. I've never actually sat down and counted it, that have received funding through this program since we've been involved. Oh, excuse me. So now we're kind of drilling down more to the direct purposes and goals of these grants. And these are goals that we established, we the managers of this grant program, Restore America's Estuaries and EPA, in support of that broader SNEP strategic plan. So again, I wouldn't say that every single grant we fund has every single one of these elements, but most of the grants, let's just say most of the grants we fund have most of these elements, and all of them have at least a few of these elements. And I would also say the more of these elements are being achieved or satisfied in a proposal, in a project, the more likely that project is to be funded. So this is kind of the lens that we look at our funding decisions through, or another lens, I should say. And these are just examples of some of the projects we funded. It is not comprehensive, but it captures kind of a lot of our kind of big funding areas in the past. Partnerships to restore estuarine water quality and habitats. We funded urban projects, green streets and that kind of thing, and urban stormwater. We've funded training projects, a lot of demonstration projects. We like to fund pilot projects. If you're doing a project in your town, but it can, and this goes back to that capacity issue that, I'll probably be talking about that a little bit in a few minutes as well. If you're doing a local project, but you can do it in a way that communicates with other communities how the successes or failures of that project are applicable to their work, then that's a big plus. We have funded a number of wetland and river restoration projects, other habitat projects, coastal, projects to address coastal sea level rise and coastal change. Innovative technologies. These, this falls in that pilot projects bucket often. Some applied ecosystem research. I'll be talking about that in just a minute. A lot of work either to develop or implement watershed or regional plans for water quality or other ecological restoration activities. And then we have a category, you'll see that we call, I forget what we call it right now, but a small grants category, specifically for, peer-to-peer learning grants. It's specifically for conferences and tech transfer. And, if you need $20,000 to do a really comprehensive conference on, particular environmental topic, that would be a good place to go. But generally speaking, as I'll be saying, I'll be touching on in a minute, generally speaking, our grants are, more in the $100,000 to $400,000 range is kind of our typical funding range. These are usually the organizations we fund fall into one of these buckets here. We can fund, as kind of a general rule, we can fund anybody other than, we don't give grants to like private citizens or private corporations or federal agencies or subdivisions of federal agencies, but kind of anybody else is eligible. And I guess what I mean by that is any public entity, any non-federal public entity, or private nonprofits as well. This year we have up to 1.85 million available for this program. And I'm just going to touch on each of these points because they're important points, both in terms of the process and the substance of these grants this year. I mentioned that you really should take a look at the SNEP strategic plan if you're considering applying to this program, because that's what the program is for, is to help implement the strategic plan. The first step is a letter of intent. Again, if you go to snepgrants.org, you can link to our grants portal. I'm going to say right up front that we've been having some technical support problems with the company that provides the grant management system for us. And it's, unfortunately, I think it's COVID related, staffing problems that a lot of people are having in the IT sector. And so I will say, if I'm pretty confident that the portal is bug-free at this point, but if you have any issues with the portal at all, give me a call or shoot me an email, because there may be an issue that I can resolve from the back end if you're having a technical problem. So please feel free to reach out to me with any problems on the with the online interface. We have a multidisciplinary review committee that reviews the applications. It's mostly federal and state people, and from obviously both Massachusetts and Rhode Island, with pretty broad expertise ranging from habitat to water quality to fisheries backgrounds and that sort of thing. We encourage coordination with the SNEP network, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more, but you can link to the SNEP network from EPA's SNEP page or from our SNEP page. And you can think of the SNEP network as kind of the technical assistance arm of SNEP if we're the competitive funding arm of SNEP. And we try to work pretty closely with them on supporting projects and communities that meet the goals of the strategic plan. We've been, over the last couple of years, we've been really emphasizing underrepresented communities and trying to get applications and fund projects in places that have not necessarily been funded in the past. And by that, I mean not just what you might kind of traditionally think of as underrepresented, but any community that's underrepresented within this program as well. So if we've never provided a grant in your town in the past, we're going to look a little bit more favorably on that, because part of the goal of this project is to fund throughout the SNEP region. Having said that, we have funded pretty broadly throughout the region already, although there's some areas, we tend to get more applications from than others. So we're always on the lookout for projects and areas that haven't been supported, that have good ideas that haven't been supported in the past. We've been also increasing over the last couple of years the emphasis on habitat resilience versus straight ahead water quality, although we really see those as two sides of the same coin, and many of the projects we fund kind of integrate those issues. We've been increasing the technical support that's available for both applicants and grantees to try to make this program as accessible as possible, both in terms of the applications and in terms of implementation. Excuse me for just a minute. For the last couple of years, we've excluded environmental monitoring and research per se from our funding decisions. And by that, I mean a freestanding environmental monitoring or research project, which we have funded in the past. But at present, EPA is funding quite a bit of that work through other means with SNEP dollars. And primarily for that reason, we decided that, and because funding is, somewhat limited for this program, we decided not to fund those kinds of projects through the grants program again this year. Although, if there's monitoring or research that is integrated with a project, for example, you're doing let's just say you're doing a dam removal, and in order to do the dam removal, you need to do environmental studies ahead of time, or you're doing post-removal studies to test the performance of the project. That kind of work will fund. The work that we won't fund would be if you were doing, let's say, a freestanding environmental monitoring project. For example, in prior years, we funded monitoring buoys in Narragansett Bay and Mount Hope Bay for ongoing water quality monitoring. And that's the kind of more general research and monitoring that we're excluding from the grants again this year. Not to say we'll exclude it next year, but this year we are. And we're also allowing applicants to request waiver of match, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a minute. If the match requirements, non-federal match requirements, are a barrier to your application or your being able to do a project, then let us know and we'll see if we can fix that. Now, if I can, there we go. Here's our timeline. As you know, the RFP is on the street. This is the first of 2 virtual workshops, and the letter of intent is due on April 26th. By mid-May, we'll let you know whether or not we're requesting a full proposal. And the full proposal, if it's requested, is due at the end of June. We'll notify you over the summer whether you've been awarded the grant, and we'll announce the grants in September as we do every year. This is just, if I think about the projects we've funded in the past and what's been successful, both in terms of getting funded and in producing good projects. I've already mentioned the SNEP strategic plan and the vision, goals, and priorities within that. By significant positive impact on ecosystems and communities, I mean we try not to fund projects, very limited projects. For a small site-specific project, I always tell people, if the way that we typically fund those is if it's something that has a much broader applicability. If it's a small pilot project, we might fund that. But generally speaking, we're looking for projects that really have a meaningful impact on the environment. Again, we're looking for integrated projects. We see almost everything is related to water quality in one way or another. We very much encourage partnerships. I think last year, I don't think we funded a single project that wasn't some kind of a partnership, either new or ongoing. We look to build local and regional capacity, and that can take any number of forms, anything from, you're buying a vac, we're helping to fund part of a vac truck so that maybe a regional consortium of communities has the physical capacity to maintain stormwater BMPs, or it could be we're funding a project that is developing knowledge or practice, about either specific techniques or policy approaches or financing approaches that are applicable elsewhere throughout the region. We always look for a strong outreach component. We like it when our grantees engage stakeholders. Your stakeholders, depending on the project you're doing, may be more, professional in nature. They may be the general public. And we kind of leave it up to you to define that, but we do look for communication with stakeholders. Sorry. We also look for projects that that inform communities and community leaders, and that ultimately influence policy where we can fund those. And this last bullet is a little vague, but it's really, really important. And what it means is that we don't like to fund plans or studies that have little or no chance of translating ultimately into positive impacts on the environment. So, we do occasionally get proposals for plans that are maybe like really interesting, but the applicant really hasn't thought through how that plan is going to influence action, whether it's action by communities, action by nonprofits, action by state agencies. And so whatever you propose, obviously, if you're installing a construction, if you're looking for construction funding, then implementation isn't an issue, because that's what you're asking for, is funding for implementation. But if you're funding the non-implementation stage of a project, whether it's planning, permitting, design, a broader assessment, whatever it happens to be, communicate with us in the application how you think this is going to get translated into reality. And we understand that there are often uncertainties around these projects. There are a lot of good watershed plans and stormwater plans that were developed with a general idea of how implementation was going to occur. And then over time, they've been implemented sometimes in different ways. Sometimes they've kind of developed a life of their own that the original authors didn't even anticipate. So we realize that there's uncertainty around that, but we want to know that you've at least thought about it and have a plan for follow through, as opposed to just we've all heard the phrase about plans that sit on the shelf, and we've all seen a lot of those. Here's some more things to think about as you're developing a proposal. Identified needs means, it's kind of like the last point I was raising, or related to it anyway, which is that when you propose a solution, we need to know what the problem is. Like, what is the problem that's actually a question, I think, on the, not in quite those words, but on the application, which is what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and how does the work that you're proposing contribute towards solving that problem. And it's always, I think, valuable to be really clear about that in your mind when you develop any proposal, not just for this program. Regional and watershed plans are often really important in this kind of work, as most of you know. Your project may be part of a plan, an existing plan. It may be developing a plan. It may be modifying a plan. It may be building on a plan. It may completely ignore an existing plan in the region. But let's say, for example, you're proposing stormwater BMPs in an area that has a water quality plan, but the water quality plan doesn't address these particular BMPs. That's okay. But you should let us know that, because the folks on our review committee are pretty knowledgeable about the existing plans in place throughout the SNEP region. And if it looks to us that you're just not aware of other planning efforts in the region, then we're going to wonder why that is. If you're aware of the planning efforts and for whatever reason they don't address what you're trying to do, just let us know that, and we'll look at it in that context. I talked about partnerships and how important they are. We do like to see, if you're working in a municipality or in a community, it's great to see the community being committed to that, both because it makes for better projects and also tends to result in projects with fewer snags. And there's a non-federal match requirement, as I mentioned, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. I'm going to take just a sec and look at the chat box here and make sure there's nothing okay, Rob just posted a really good point, which is that you can find a lot of information about our previous grants. If you go to snepgrants.org, you can then click on the individual grant years and see what we funded in 2018 through 2021. There's also a map that you can click on and see where we funded projects. I'm also going to interrupt this broadcast to answer Stephanie Hessler's question, which is the difference between gray and green infrastructure in the eyes of SNEP. Underground infiltration system, would that be seen as gray or green? Can funds be used to enhance municipal staff capacity to see a previously funded SNEP project through? The second question, I would say yes. That's an easy yes. The first question, where's the line between gray and green? I mean, we try to fund green infrastructure, but we don't draw a bright line. And I'll give you an example. We funded a project, and are still funding a project by the Buzzards Bay Coalition, looking at the Wareham wastewater treatment plant and looking at kind of big picture planning efforts to bring other communities into using that plant, and some of the changes that would have to happen, not just technically, but kind of programmatically and fiscally, in order for more communities to partner with Wareham for wastewater treatment. Now, it's really a gray infrastructure project in the sense that it's sewer tie-ins, really, is ultimately what you're looking at. How do you finance those? But it's a project that couldn't be funded by any other means. It couldn't be funded through SRF or the usual sources of wastewater treatment funding. And it's potentially a project that will have a really enormous positive impact on Buzzards Bay water quality. And so we decided several years ago that it was worthy of SNEP support. Generally speaking, the sort of classic gray infrastructure projects that you think about, sewer tie-ins, and actually building a sewer tie-in or building an upgrade on a wastewater treatment plant is not the sort of thing we would normally fund. And underground infiltration basin, I think it would, I think we'd have to take a look at it. And there's another kind of related question about using gray infrastructure to restore habitat. And I mean, when you think about it, that's done all the time, right? Because if you remove a dam and build a bridge, or let's say remove a culvert and build a bridge, you're using gray infrastructure to restore habitat, right? The bridge is gray infrastructure, but that's clearly something we would fund. So it's not a bright line, you know. Read the RFP, and use your judgment, and feel free to give me a ring. And now back to our previously scheduled broadcast here. These are just my observations of some of the things that typically don't fare well in our competitive evaluations. I talked about projects that are not well connected to potential implementation, projects that are not clear about what are the results or benefits of this project, projects that ignore existing plans. You know, I mentioned this already. Proposals that overlook, you know, obvious partnership opportunities. If there's another organization that is doing similar work with you, or if let's say you're a nonprofit, you're proposing to do work on municipal property, and the municipality isn't a partner, it's probably not going to do that well in our evaluation. And every once in a while, I'll get two proposals to do the same thing by two organizations that are like right next to each other and know each other. And, you know, obviously, you know, we're not going to fund, if projects are that closely competing with one another, we're not going to fund them both. So, you know, it's always worthwhile to get together with others in your area. And sometimes we'll put people together too. So there have been times when we've received a couple of letters of intent from organizations that were doing something similar and weren't aware of the other's work, and we've, you know, suggested to them they reach out to the other, and then at that point it's up to them whether or not they want to get together and merge into a single application, or you know, modify the project or whatever. I definitely, you know, we have this online application portal. I think it's very easy to do an LOI. It should be a letter of intent. It should be really seamless, really easy. Again, if you have any problems with it, let me know. But you really need to read the RFP. The online interface is not, it gives you instructions as you go along, but it doesn't give you all the background that you really need to write a good application. So definitely read the RFP before you start filling in the questions on the portal. Our funding is all reimbursable, which means that you incur costs and then you know, submit your invoices to us, and we reimburse. We require 33% of the award amount in non-federal match. So a $100,000 grant requires 33,333 or whatever in match. We don't count it to the penny, but in general, you know, one third of the grant amount in non-federal match. 2-year performance period on these grants. It's a little shorter than in years past, because we found that people were not all grantees by any means, but some of our grantees were kind of sitting on funding, and we're trying to discourage that. We have other measures in our new grant agreements to discourage that. So basically, you're required to begin spending the funds within, I forget if it's a quarter or 2 quarters, but semi-annual grant reports. Quality assurance plans are usually required of our projects. This is an EPA requirement. There's more information on it in the RFP, and you can link to more information from our website. If you have questions about this, give me a call. There are quite a few federal funding requirements. I'm sure most of you know, everything from, you know, open competition for subcontracts over a certain dollar amount, to DBE, diversity business requirements. And so again, those are all spelled out in the request for proposals. What this means, applications can be developed over several cycles. If you haven't gotten a grant in the past, it doesn't mean, if you applied for a grant and you didn't get it, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get it this year. I mean, we've very often had organizations apply for grants, not be funded, go back, work on their project more and be funded in a subsequent year. So don't be discouraged about that. And often applications improve quite a bit over time. And I'm always available. We're here to provide assistance. Give me a call if you need. Obviously I can't give you any inside knowledge, but even if I had it, but I can certainly give you general information and support. I mentioned the SNEP network, and I mentioned that it's really kind of the technical assistance arm of the broader SNEP program, just as we're the competitive grants arm. And I would encourage you to take a look at what they do, and where possible, either use the SNEP network to develop a project that you may then apply for a watershed grant, or vice versa. You may have a grant from us and bring the SNEP network in to provide additional technical assistance. And so that's about it for my little chat here, or at least the presentation part of our little chat. And again, here's the webpage where you can link to the RFP and so forth. And here's my email, so feel free to reach out to me. I would definitely encourage you to take a look at EPA's SNEP page as well. And with that, I'm going to open the floor to questions, comments, and complaints. Okay, let's go to the chat box first. Okay. So April asked, she said past grant rounds were typically for 18 months and this one is 2 years. Actually, it was 2.5 years in the past, so we're actually making it a little shorter. And she's asking, is there any benefit for proposals that indicate ability to complete work in a shorter time frame? So not per se, in the sense that we're not going to grade a proposal specifically on that, but I would say that in general, a project that's, we say right in the RFP that projects should be ready to go. And that addresses that problem or issue that I mentioned before about some organizations kind of sitting on funding. And then there are always projects that kind of drag out and you really wonder why they're taking so long, frankly. Part of, I think, having a good work plan, we ask for a work plan. It doesn't have to be long, but part of a good work plan is having thought through kind of the critical path of how this project is going to happen, regardless of what kind of project it is. And if you can communicate with that with us, we would rather give our funding to somebody who's going to use it than somebody who's going to drag it out, because ultimately we can fund more good projects if we can fund them and they get done and we go on to the next one, So I hope that, I don't know if that answers the question, but I hope so. Stephanie asks, does hiring an engineering firm to do work on a project require multiple bids for procurements above 10,000 if you're working with a town that already has a preferred engineering firm? The unfortunately short answer to that is go to our webpage, link to the federal procurement guidelines, and there's different competition requirements for different dollar thresholds. If the town already has a preferred engineering firm, if they're using federal dollars, they still have to adhere to the federal rules. Typically, municipalities, if anything, are stricter than the federal government, in my experience. So I've never had an issue with a municipality where their rules allowed them to do something that was not allowed by the federal government. Typically, it's the other way, that they're actually more, their competition requirements tend to be stricter than the federal requirements. So I think we have, let's see, there is another. Okay, and then we have Keith from the Pecasset Water Quality Coalition. They would like to apply for grants for new nitrogen reducing septic systems, looking for tips to get started. Okay, this is a good question because this comes up a lot. If the, sorry to pause here for a minute, but just try to formulate this. SNEP dollars are public funds and have to be fulfilling a public purpose. Moreover, they have to be fulfilling a purpose that isn't a sort of standing requirement of a public or private party. So for example, if a homeowner is putting in a nitrogen reducing septic system because they're adding, putting an addition on their house, and here in Rhode Island, adding another bedroom, and DEM gets involved in the permitting process and tells you need a nitrogen, an advanced septic system, SNEP is not going to pay for that. Because that's a requirement of the private party to do what they want to do. Similarly, if a state agency is putting in a new highway ramp, and Army Corps of Engineers comes along and says, okay, you're filling 5 acres of wetlands, so you need to go restore 5 acres of wetlands, someplace else, and as part of your permit, your 404 permit, SNEP is not going to pay for that, because again, it is it's a requirement of that organization that would have to do with or without SNEP dollars. And the whole idea of SNEP dollars is to fund work that wouldn't otherwise happen. On the other hand, if, let's say you're in an area where nitrogen reducing septic systems are not required, but would have a positive impact on water quality, and you are developing a plan to figure out how to incentivize people to install nitrogen reducing septic systems, a plan that wouldn't otherwise be developed. That's something we would consider, because again, it's not addressing anybody's specific requirement under the law or whatever. So take a look at the RFP. It does address this issue. Feel free to call me if it's still not clear to you. But really, at the end of the day, it really comes down to public benefit and work that would not be funded through other means without a grant to fund it. I have another question here from April. The online portal requires you to enter your UEI for profile. Is this the DUNS number or UEI from SAM? Yeah, this is what I mean by federal requirements. So up until last year, so there's this SAM is the System for Award Management. It's some federal database or something that you basically need to register for SAM in order to apply for a grant. That's a requirement in the RFP. Until last year, you also needed a Dun & Bradstreet number called the DUNS number. Why, I don't know, but that's the requirement. As of this year, you no longer need a DUNS number. You need a UEI, which is a Universal Employer Identifier or something like that. I am told that when you register for SAMS, it will generate a UEI number for you, UEI, and you just type it into the field. I think, if I remember correctly, I think the letter of intent says you can put it down as pending if you don't have it yet. For the full proposal, you'll need to have SAM registration and tell us the date of expiration, and you'll need to have that UEI. So I hope that helps. If that doesn't answer your question, shoot me an email and we'll figure it out. Let me see if there are any other. It looks to me like I have addressed the one Q&A we had, and it looks like I've addressed everything in the chat. I'll give it just a minute in case anybody has any additional questions. And again, just by all means, just feel free to shoot me an email if you have additional questions. We'll, at the very least, we'll put the presentation on the website. We might put the entire video. I'm not sure it's really needed, so we may just put the PowerPoint up, and I'll just say feel free to reach out to me if I can answer any further questions. Thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you all apply for SNEP Watershed grants, or we're calling them SWIG grants now, for SNEP Watershed implementation grants. I hope you all get one, and good luck, and let me know if you have any problems. Thanks.